Welcome to the Tuesday edition of Wyatt's World, and different background from normal. I am in my kitchen, my stove behind me and my various cooking oils and condiments and so forth up on the shelf there, because I'm going to be doing some cooking today. And as you may have noticed in past episodes, I'm shifting into Christmas mode, and I'm going to spend most of the rest of this month and December and early January dealing with the Christmas season, which will include New Year's and into Twelfth Night. And then after that, I'm going to switch gears a little bit, and I'm going to use this channel to talk mostly about various anthropological topics, which will still include some cooking and some travel notes and some general philosophical pondering and so forth, but it'll be more directed towards anthropology. Well, as you may have noticed if you watched previous videos, I've been gearing up for cooking, and you've seen a little bit about my mincemeat already. And today I'm going to talk about Christmas pudding. I make Christmas pudding every year, have done for 40 years. And most of that time, I make a Christmas pudding one year and keep it for a year. In temperate climates, like where I lived in New York, I could keep it in a relatively cool place, maybe on my porch or something like that. Here in the tropics, I have to keep it in the refrigerator because otherwise it will spoil. But I keep it for a year. So the pudding I will show you on Christmas Day, flaming with brandy and so forth, is the one I made last year. This one I'm putting down to be eaten next year. And this past Sunday is called Stir Up Sunday, and it's called Stir Up Sunday because of the Anglican Collect, that is the opening of the Church of England service for that Sunday, which begins "Stir up, O Lord," blah blah blah. And people have taken that humorously to mean it's the day to stir up your Christmas pudding. And it's the Sunday before Advent. All the Sundays from now on, I'm going to be celebrating the various Sundays of Advent, and I'll talk about that. I'll talk about my concept of unpacking Christmas, and approaching Christmas slowly and carefully and mindfully. And today I'm going to just look at how you go about making a Christmas pudding. And this first part is divided into 3 days of work. I mean, not 3 whole days of work, but work that spans 3 days, 3 steps. And then there's a 4th step, which is actually final preparation of the pudding, which you do on Christmas Day. This is just the first 3 steps. So let's get into it. So let me start talking about preparing a Christmas pudding by talking about the steps that have to be taken. And it's actually a 4-step process And 3 steps are going to be carried out now on Stir Up Sunday, or thereabouts. I'm actually not doing this on Stir Up Sunday, I'm doing it beforehand. First 3 steps are to soak the fruit for the pudding in brandy and leave it to sit for 24 hours. That's the step I'm going to do today. Tomorrow I'm going to combine some flour and eggs and make what constitutes the pudding part, I guess, and mix it with the marinated fruit and let that sit for another 24 hours. And then on the 3rd day, the pudding is placed in a basin and steamed. Now I'm using a recipe that I don't know very well. In fact, for many years now, I haven't used a recipe at all. I've just kind of gauged it by eye. I used to use a recipe that was for Queen Victoria, produced by his chef Francatelli, and it worked very well. But I left that back in New York and I haven't found an example since then, so I'm using a recipe that seems a bit similar. The pudding is basically fruit, and we're starting here with raisins and sultanas. Well, sultanas are also called golden raisins. And I've got together 300 grams, 200 grams of raisins and 100 grams of sultanas. And I'm also going to add some crystallized fruits and some maraschino cherries. And that will complete the fruits, and then I'm going to add some brandy. So you can see I've added some crystallized fruits. Actually it's pineapple, papaya, and I'm going to add some kiwi. Normally in Britain we use mixed peel, candied peel. Can't get it here in Cambodia. So this will have to do. It works very well actually. And now I'm just going to add a few cherries, and then I'm going to add the brandy and let everything marinate. Now a certain amount depends on what fruit you actually add, and certainly people will add prunes and figs and maybe even dates. My last hurrah here is to add a few cherries. I really find the cherries are pretty much essential to a nice Christmas pudding. Cut them in half, or break them in half. I don't add a whole lot. And I also should mention that traditionally we used to put a sixpence in the pudding. In the old days, a sixpence was a silver coin, and we would place it in the pudding, and then whoever got it was the lucky one. I think when I was a boy, my mum used to secretly put a sixpence in my portion. I'm not sure, and some people have special tokens they place in the puddings, bringing good luck or some kind of good fortune. But there's always a danger that somebody's going to swallow one, so that's kind of out of favor these days. Anyway, there's the cherries going in. I'm not going to add too many, but enough. They add a certain flavor to the pudding that I particularly like, and a little bit of color as well. So next step will be the brandy. Now I have about half a cup of brandy here, which is a lot of brandy, but some people will put a mixture of brandy and stout into the mix, but I don't have any stout. But I do have brandy, and that's fine. And the brandy that I've got here has been sitting in a mixture of whole cloves and dried mace leaves, so it's giving it a bit of a spicy kick. I'll talk about the spices more tomorrow, but for right now I just need to start marinating the fruit, and I'm going to save the spices. So now we have everything ready. I just need to stir it up, and then I'm going to let it sit for 24 hours. And it is really, really important to do this step. You'll see tomorrow when we come back that the fruit will soak up all of that brandy, and I'm also at this point going to add a little bit of sugar, so it's going to look something like my mincemeat and taste something like the mincemeat as well. The sugar is not so important except to prevent spoilage, because there's chances, particularly here in the tropics, that molds and things will grow, and the sugar will prevent all of that. So I'm going to add some sugar and then let everything marinate for a day. So I have 450 grams of fruit, half a cup of brandy, and now I'm going to add about 100 grams of dark brown sugar. In this case it's Cambodian sugar. Alright, I'm going to give all that a good stir, and then we'll come back tomorrow. Now on to day 2 of making the Christmas pudding, and I'm going to start with some dry ingredients and then add the moist ingredients. And what I've got here so far is 100 grams of ground almond flour and 100 grams of whole almonds. I'm going to add about 150 grams of flour, all-purpose flour, and many recipes call for breadcrumbs. In fact, a greater amount of breadcrumbs than flour, and the justification is always that the breadcrumbs make the pudding lighter. And I just laugh at that because I don't want a light pudding. I want a really dense, heavy pudding. That's my experience. So I'm going to be adding some fat as well. Normally in England I would use suet, but here I'm using butter, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. And then I'm also going to add some lemon zest, and then the juice of a lemon, and then the fruits back in. So let's get started with all of that. Alright, so that's 150 grams of flour. Now I'm going to add the butter, and what I've done is I've frozen it, and now I'm going to grate it into the pot. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time showing you what I'm doing, but anyway, I'm going to grate 100 grams into the flour mixture. So there's the butter added, and you can see it curls up into nice little ground pieces. I froze the butter just to make it easier to cut up like that. In the past I have also melted the butter. Not sure that I see much of a difference, but I'm just trying it this way this time. I used to do the same with suet in Argentina. I couldn't get ground suet like you can get in the UK or in the United States. and so I've used to freeze the suet and then use my scraper to cut it up like this. And now I'm going to add the zest of a lemon, and then I'm going to add the juice. So I've added the lemon zest and the lemon juice. Never been quite sure about the lemon in terms of taste, but I always do it. I think there may be some chemistry involved that I don't fully understand, but I'll always do it. Now I've got my fruit that has been marinating, and I'm going to add all of that, including the brandy. And I'm going to need to scoop out the bottom a little bit. Make sure that I get every last drop, and I'm particularly interested in making sure I have enough fluid so that everything binds together nicely. There we go. Starting to smell like Christmas. The zesting the lemon was the start of the aroma process, and the brandy and spices is the next step. I've got 3 eggs, 3 whole eggs. I've beaten. I'm going to add them, and I think I have got everything in here now, and the last step is to stir it all up. And I'll begin the process for you, and I'll have to get a little bit more energetic. It tends to be a stiff batter, and it's hard to work, and you have to make sure that everything is incorporated. So I'll show you at the end, and like when everything is properly incorporated, this is the time when you ask everybody in the family to come and stir the Christmas pudding and make a wish. So you can see it's coming together fairly nicely, but I'm going to just stop filming for now and complete it, and then I'll come back. And there, it's all nicely combined. It's really, really important to make sure you don't have any little pockets of flour left over. This is not particularly damp. I mean, it's like a very stiff cake batter. You don't want it to be too loose. You also don't want it to be too tight. You have to just kind of gauge it. And if it is a bit tight, then you can add a little bit more brandy or whatever liqueur you're using. Some people use whiskey, some people use dark rum. It's all up to you. I've always used French brandy. And I'm going to make my wish, and then I will see you tomorrow. I just need to catch up a little bit before we go on to day 3, which is to say that the fruit and the batter mixture, all nicely stirred by all the family, has to sit for another 24 hours before it gets steamed. And I noticed as I was reviewing the video that I did not mention all of the spices that go in. I mentioned the fact that whole cloves and whole dried mace were soaking in the brandy. I should add that I also included into the batter, when I was stirring it up, some nutmeg, some cinnamon, some allspice, and the proportions are really up to you. I tend to be a bit heavy-handed with them, but you need to play around with them and figure out what works for you. But all of those spices combined together, including what is sometimes called mixed spice, but mixed spice is just the mixture that I've mentioned: cinnamon, nutmeg, cloves, allspice. So they have to go in at some point. And then on to day 3. Here we are on day 3 of making the Christmas pudding. The pudding mix has been sitting for 24 hours in a cool, dry place, and now I have taken a pudding basin and I've lined it with aluminium foil, which I wouldn't have done in other countries where I can get cheesecloth, but I can't get cheesecloth here, so I have to use foil. And I've packed it down nice and tightly into a pudding basin, and I'm going to cover it over with the aluminium foil, and then I'm going to place it in the steamer, and it's going to be in the steamer for about 6 hours. Yes, 6 hours. So I'm going to have to keep a kettle of water kind of near the boil so that I can replace the water as it boils off. So let's wrap things up and put them in the steamer. The important step in steaming the pudding is to fold the aluminium foil over tightly so that the steam doesn't penetrate into the pudding. Place it in your steamer and keep the steamer on an even low heat so that it's continuously steaming. Make sure, I usually check about every 30 minutes to make sure that the water is still boiling, and I usually have a kettle on the boil nearby so that as it gets low I can top up the water level with boiling water so that it doesn't go off the boil, and do that for 6 hours straight. And then after 6 hours, open up the foil, and here you see the steamed pudding, nice and dark colored, rich brown color, which is what you want. And all of the cooks that I've ever read say that the longer you steam, the darker it gets. I don't know, but I steam for at least 6 hours. In the past, I've sometimes done it for 8 or 10. And steam again for about 5 or 6 hours on Christmas Day. Then place a plate over the pudding, invert, and then gently peel off the aluminium foil, which has a bad habit of sticking. You can, of course, grease the aluminum foil, and that'll make it a little bit easier. Cheesecloth, enormously easier, but this works. And here's the pudding laid out, ready to go. And last step, place the pudding, once it's cooled, into a zip-top bag and pour brandy in, and then just let it sleep. It will mature. If you are making the pudding, let's say 5 weeks before Christmas, then that's usually enough to make a nice pudding by Christmas Day. But this one is going to sit for a year in brandy. You have to check the brandy every week when you're doing it for Christmas on Stir-Up Sunday, or maybe once a month if you're doing it all year. I usually just dump a whole bunch of brandy in the bag and just let it sit, and I forget about it. So there we are. Next, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Christmas story in Luke. I talked a little bit about it last week. I'm going to continue that, and then we'll get on with our unpacking Christmas and other Christmas recipes. Meanwhile, if you like my videos, please tell your friends, like and subscribe, and I will be back with you on Friday.